We found it useful to meet you today and speak about how the situation is developing around the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. I mean the southeast regions, primarily. As you know, the humanitarian convoy, which was sent by Russia to the Lugansk region, after the many-day torment, agreements, re-agreements, finally reached the destination. Today, the distribution of the humanitarian aid begins. The representatives of the International Red Cross Committee participate in this. They advise local authorities on the distribution plans, and we expect everything to be as planned. And those who need this aid, almost all the civil population of the Lugansk region and even in Donetsk region, those who need the aid will receive it, we hope. Still, it is understandable that the convoy situation was not healthy. We tried to act within the norms and principles of the international humanitarian law. We received the initial agreement of the Ukrainian side, which was confirmed by the note of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine of the 12th of August. We worked with close contact with the customs services of Ukraine. Their representatives were present and are present, as I understand, on the Russian border crossing Donetsk. So everyone had an opportunity to make sure, including the mass media, to make sure that there was nothing in those trucks except the humanitarian cargo, and all the trucks, after delivering the cargo, have returned to the territory of the Russian Federation empty. I'd like to express the gratitude to everyone who, despite many difficulties, mostly subjective, not objective difficulties, helped us to implement this humanitarian action, including the mass media. Your colleagues had an opportunity to make sure, even before the convoy began movement, long before, your colleagues had an opportunity to make sure that this cargo was of a humanitarian nature. Undoubtedly that helped to the civilian population, but the humanitarian crisis has not ended, and in the press releases of the International Red Cross Committee, it is said that the Lugansk population needs humanitarian aid, and the staff of the ICRC in Lugansk report that the shelling of the civilian quarters of the city continue, that there is lack of phone communication, lack of potable water, lack of medicine, and many people do not know about their relatives for weeks. So the Red Cross highlights the necessity to fix the situation and urges all the sides to not use the weapons of non-selective character and to not allow attacking civilian objects or people, such as hospitals, transport, etc. And the fact that those objects are shelled can be seen through the reports of your colleagues on the site. Markets, churches, kindergartens, schools, a stadium that happened recently, a stadium was damaged. And I believe that the military experts understand that better than all of us present here, including me, that this cannot be just excused by the wrongful shooting or some accidents. We have also studied the recent reports of the special OSCE monitoring mission, which was sent to Vienna. They say about the deteriorating humanitarian situation in the southeast of Ukraine. It is linked with the combat actions that continue. It is linked with the airstrikes on houses and other facilities, utility facilities of Donbass. From the ICRC, from the OSCE, the Council of Europe, from the UN humanitarian institutions, from the leaders of many states, there are calls to continue the aid. The representatives of the Red Cross speak for that. Yesterday they announced that they are going to expand their activities in Lugansk and on the east of Ukraine, and they are going to increase the amount of their operations of the International Red Cross Committee. These operations are implemented with the active participation of donors, and Russia is interested to continue to be one of the sponsors of that. We expect that the Ukrainian government, we know that the Ukrainian government has sent their own humanitarian convoy to the Lugansk region, and they are being distributed. That is good. We know about the plans of the European Union to render humanitarian assistance and aid to the civilian population of Ukraine, and Russia will continue to participate in all those efforts. Yesterday we sent an official note to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, where we informed about our intention to prepare another humanitarian convoy. We have also included the detailed list of the cargo that is planned to be sent, and expressed our hope for close cooperation with the Ukrainian authorities in agreeing on all the necessary formalities. We expect that it would take not such a long time, taking into account our existing experience. The situation is getting worse in the humanitarian plane, so any slowdown would violate the commitments of all the states on international humanitarian law. So we would like to agree on all the conditions of sending the second convoy on the same route, within the same parameters, with the participation of Ukrainian customs officers and border guards in the nearest days. We are convinced that we must do that this week. The same note was sent to the ICRC, and we invited the representatives of the Red Cross to continue our cooperation in this matter. So we hope that all the misunderstandings that took place during the first humanitarian convoy, and there will be no artificial slowdown in this operation. We are openly urging to close cooperation, to the transparency of what we are doing, and I'd like to highlight the fact that the first humanitarian convoy, in the end, actually delivered the humanitarian cargo without any incidents. This gives us an opportunity to expect that a second convoy would be easier to implement. We are urging our Ukrainian colleagues and the International Red Cross Committee to actively cooperate in this humanitarian mission, and we, in our turn, will be ready to use our contacts with the self-defense fighters in order to guarantee the security on their side, not only for the Russian convoy, but for those humanitarian aids, humanitarian cargo that the Ukrainian side wants to send to southeastern Ukraine. We have given clear reference to that in our note to the Foreign Ministry of that country. I would like also to speak about tomorrow's meeting in Minsk, the meeting of the presidents of the Customs Union, Russia, Kazakhstan and Belarus, with the President of Ukraine with the participation of the European Commission representatives. We expect that there would be 3 commissioners who will arrive in Minsk. And the main issue on the agenda will be consideration of the economic linkages between the customs union and Ukraine, between the European Union and Ukraine, which is an important subject. We urged our partners to begin non-politicized, professional and pragmatic dialogue, conversation about how the commitments of the Ukrainian state on the free trade area with the CIS and the commitments which the Ukrainian side is ready to take within the signed but not yet ratified association agreement with the EU coincide, how they actually are put together. This topic, as you know, is linked with the existing crisis, because the accusations towards President Yanukovych last November were that he postponed the association agreement, and that served as a pretext to begin the forcible actions to organize the armed protests, which ended in an armed coup d'etat. And before that moment and after that moment, we regularly urged the parties to sit down at the same table and talk about the situation. How would we find the solution to that when there is the contradiction of the commitments of Ukraine towards the CIS free trade area and the EU association? We speak for harmonization of relations of Ukraine with the customs union and with the European Union in economy. And we are convinced that if there is goodwill, if there is the desire to be governed by the norms of the WTO and other norms of the international law, which are enshrined in the signed and active agreements, we believe that this will help to agree on all those issues. There have been consultations recently, as you know, on economic problems between the Russian and Ukrainian experts, and the interim results of those consultations will be reported tomorrow in Minsk. So we hope that they will help us to begin a business, non-ideologized conversation which would take into account all the legitimate interests of all the participants. We expect that tomorrow at our meeting the problems of the humanitarian crisis will also be discussed in this or that format, and that all the participants would call on humanitarian aid to be delivered without barriers to all those who need it in the southeast of Ukraine. And of course, everyone expects that the meeting in Minsk will allow us to exchange opinions on the situation of the beginning of the political process to settle the crisis in Ukraine. Today, we hear a lot of statements about that a political dialogue must be initiated. We hear that the Minsk format is not the only format, that there are other formats which must be used. There is the Norman Quartet, there is the Geneva format, and I remind you that this is the Ukraine, Russia, the US and the European Union. Prime Minister Yatsenyuk spoke about this format, and Irina Gerashchenko, the special representative of the President on settling the crisis, they said that this Geneva format, with the participation of not only the EU but also with the US, is the best one. Well, we are ready to any format, and President Putin highlighted that. The most important thing, the format must bring practical results, so that we would move from the civil war in Ukraine to the national national dialogue and forming the national unity, which was mentioned on the 21st of February in the agreements between Mr. Yatsenyuk, Klitschko and Tagnibok and President Yanukovych. This national unity, after this agreement on the 21st of February was broken by the then opposers, no one has remembered anything about that, but now this topic has returned to the political discourse because it's really the key to move out of this severe conflict which we are witnessing in Ukraine.
Any format that may be suggested. Не подменяло содержание. А если говорить о содержании, и если как должное то, что из Киева звучат заявления о предпочтительности женевского формата, то женевский формат стартовал, напомню, 17 апреля, когда было принято заявление, в котором содержится обязательство украинской стороны незамедлительно начать конституционный процесс, включая немедленный запуск общеукраинского, инклюзивного, транспарентного, открытого диалога с вовлечением всех регионов и всех политических сил. Поэтому, выражая готовность работать в любых конфигурациях, мы исходим из того, что то, о чем уже договаривались, все-таки будет исполняться. То же самое относится и к нормандскому формату. Это Россия, Украина, Германия, Франция. Министры иностранных дел нормандского формата собирались несколько раз. Последний раз это было 17 августа. А 2 июля, когда такая встреча на уровне министров состоялась, была принята Берлинская декларация, в которой на первое место была вынесена задача незамедлительного прекращения огня без каких-либо условий. Точно так же, как и инклюзивный общенациональный конституционный процесс не начался с апреля этого года, хотя тогда был призыв сделать это немедленно. Также и задача прекращения огня без предварительных условий не выполняется, потому что из Киева мы слышим постоянно о необходимости предпринять некие шаги в качестве предварительных условий для прекращения огня. Завершая свое вступительное слово, еще раз подчеркну, мы готовы работать в любом составе, готовы помогать украинцам находить договоренности между собой, помогать им согласовывать те параметры, которые необходимы для того, чтобы они жили в одном государстве при уважении всех меньшинств, культурных, языковых, религиозных особенностей каждого региона. И, конечно же, вопросы о том, как децентрализовать полномочия, какими компетенциями будут обладать регионы, все это должно быть предметом переговоров и предметом обоюдного согласия, поскольку навязывать что-то из центра в украинской области, наверное, и в обычных условиях не очень просто, а в нынешних просто невозможно. Мы рассчитываем, что все наши зарубежные партнеры в своих подходах к украинскому кризису будут руководствоваться теми же самыми принципами, тем более, что эти принципы закреплены в целом ряде документов, которые принимались с участием европейцев, американцев и украинской стороны. Спасибо, пожалуйста. Если у вас есть вопросы, я буду готов на них ответить.
По-моему, испанские наши коллеги.
Please, our Spanish colleagues. Mic for the speaker, please. Оратора не слышно, к сожалению.
Россия будет представлять прежде всего
на
выполнение предыдущих
as far as I understand, Russia is going to insist on implementing
остановка боевых
the
действий.
agreements that had been achieved before, including the ceasefire, with no preconditions. Is that right?
Несколько в затруднении нахожусь от вашего вопроса, потому что
Well, you know, with your question, you've put me in a difficult situation. You've asked whether Russia is going to insist on the previous agreement on the ceasefire with no
А
preconditions.
чем этот план плох?
What is bad about the
Чем он
plan?
отличается
How is that
от
different
принципиальных подходов, которые
from
мировое
the
сообщество
fundamental approaches
продвигает в
that the
отношении любого
international
другого
community
конфликта, будь то в Африке,
is
будь то на Ближнем Востоке,
usually
будь то
advocates
где угодно?
when it is relevant to any conflict
Почему
in any
сейчас
part of the
все
world, in
призывают к
Africa
тому,
or in the
чтобы
Middle
продолжить
East?
переговоры между
Why does
палестинцами и израильтянами? Причем
everyone at the
среди
moment
палестинцев в качестве
say that it is necessary to
участников
continue the talks
процесса
between the
уже
Palestinians
все
and the
принимают и
Israeli?
Хамас, и исламский джихад.
And you know, both Hamas and the Islamic Jihad are accepted as the negotiation partners.
Давно уже
And the
призывают
same
к
is relevant
национальному
for the
примирению с участием
Afghanistan,
талибов, хотя
because, you know,
верхушка талибов
for a long
включена
time,
вместе с
people have
руководством
been calling
Аль-Каиды в
for the
террористический список Совета
Taliban
Безопасности ООН.
to join the
Почему даже с
negotiations, though the Taliban
установленными
is in the
террористами
terrorist organizations list
хотят
in the
говорить
United
о
States?
политическом урегулировании.
Everyone is ready to talk,
О
even
людях,
to those
которые
parties that have
отстаивают
been
свое право на
recognized
свой
as
язык, свою
terrorists.
культуру, свою
But you know,
религию.
people in the Ukraine, they are advocating
как о
their
сепаратистах,
rights
с
for their
которыми
religion,
диалог
for their
невозможен.
language, for their rights. And
Конечно, мы будем настаивать на том, чтобы то,
they
о
are
чем
labeled
договаривались,
as
выполнялось. Мы, в
rebels
принципе,
and terrorists.
за то, чтобы все
Of course, we
держали
are
свое
going
слово.
to
Я уже не раз
insist on implementing the
имел, к
agreements
сожалению,
that were
возможность
reached.
упоминать о
Unfortunately,
недоговороспособности
I
наших
repeatedly
партнеров,
had
и мы не
occasions
хотим
to mention
потакать
that
подобной тенденции.
our
Договорились, надо
partners are not
выполнять.
ready to fulfill their obligations, but I suppose that everyone should stick to their commitments. Коммерсант, please.
Сергей Викторович, известно ли уже, состоится
Сергей
ли завтра
Викторович,
в Минске, помимо встречи представителей
do you
Таможенного
already
союза
know
и
if
Украины, а
tomorrow
также
in
еврокомиссаров,
Minsk, beside the
отдельная
meeting
встреча президентов Украины и
of the
России?
Customs Union and the
И если
European
можно, второй
Union,
дополнительный
if
вопрос.
there will be
Западные
a
эксперты говорят,
bilateral
что
meeting of the
вчерашний
presidents
парад
of Russia and
военнопленных в
Ukraine.
Донецке является
And
нарушением
you know,
международных
the
соглашений, в частности, Женевской
Western
конвенции.
journalists say
А какая
that
позиция России по этому
yesterday
поводу? Спасибо.
parade
чтобы
that
ответить
took
на
place in the
вторую часть вопроса,
southeast
мне нужно
Ukraine is a violation
понять,
of
какую
the international
конкретно
law. Do you
статью
agree to that? Well, in order to be able to answer your second question, I have to know which article of the international conventions the Western journalists are referring to. And speaking about the Minsk agenda, yes, a whole number of bilateral meetings has been planned for, but we are going to publish additional information about who is going to meet whom.
Спасибо. Агентство Рейтер, Катя Голубкова.
Thank you. Reuters agency, Екатерина Голубкова.
Предложение предлагала
I
для
wanted
встречи в Минске
to ask you about
усилить контроль за
Angela
границей,
Merkel's
и готова ли
suggestion.
Россия пойти на это,
She
и рассматривается ли
suggested
возможность усилить
to
контроль за границей при помощи членов ОБСЕ. Спасибо.
Increase border control and to do so with the help of the OSCE observers.
пошли на это,
Is Russia ready to do that?
перевыполнив, если хотите, свои
Yes, we are ready to
обязательства.
do that.
Когда мы
And
собирались в
more
формате
also,
нормандской
we have already
четверки на
done
уровне
that.
министров
You know,
иностранных
when we
дел
had a
России,
meeting of
Украины,
foreign
Германии,
ministers
Франции 2
on the
июля в
Norman
Берлине,
format, when the
там
Ukrainian,
договаривались
Russian, German
о
and
том,
French
чтобы
foreign ministers met,
по
we
итогам
agreed that as a follow-up,
контактов между
as a
руководством России и
follow-up
Германии
to the contacts between Russia and
обеспечить
Germany,
какой-то многосторонний пригляд
we have to
на тех пунктах пропуска,
provide for multilateral
которые с украинской стороны не
supervision or
контролируются
oversight
киевскими
at those
властями,
border
которые
crossings that are not
контролируются
controlled
ополченцами.
by the
На тот момент
Ukrainian
таких пунктов пропуска было 3,
border control authorities,
и
are
наш
controlled by
украинский
the self-defense
коллега
fighters.
при поддержке
At that moment, there
французов
were
и
3
немцев
border crossings like that,
при нашей
and our
готовности
Ukrainian colleagues, supported by the
обсуждал
German
с
and
нами
French
целесообразность
colleagues,
направления наблюдателей
discussed
ОБСЕ
with us
на
an idea of
российские
sending
КПП
the OSCE observers to the Russian
на тех
checkpoints
переходах, которые с украинской
at
стороны
those border
контролируются
crossings
ополченцами.
that are controlled by the
И мы
self-defense
были готовы
fighters from the
разместить,
Ukrainian side.
таких переходов было 3, мы были готовы
There were 3
разместить
border crossings
по
like
нашему
that.
приглашению наблюдателей ОБСЕ на
And
каждом
we
из
were
них.
ready to
Но
extend an
пока шли
invitation to
переговоры
the
в Берлине,
OSCE observers
министр иностранных дел Украины Климкин
and to place them
получил
there. But
информацию,
during
что
the
один из этих
negotiations,
переходов с украинской
Klimkin got
стороны
the
был
information that one of the border
отвоеван
crossings on the
украинскими
Ukrainian
вооруженными
side
силами.
was
И по его просьбе вместо 3
recaptured by the Ukrainian forces.
контрольно-пропускных пунктов, на которые мы были готовы пригласить
Under his
наблюдателей
request,
ОБСЕ,
instead of
оставили
3
только
border
2.
crossings, only
И
2
он буквально
were
сказал
included in the
следующее,
list.
что на тех переходах,
he
которые
literally
с украинской стороны контролирует Киев,
That on those border crossings
ничего
that are
делать не надо.
controlled
Мы
by
там сами за
Kiev
все
from
отвечаем.
the Ukrainian side,
Вот, собственно говоря, и все. С
nothing
тех
has to
пор,
be
когда
done
наблюдатели
because the Kiev
ОБСЕ
authorities
приехали на
take all the responsibility
наши
for
погранпереходы
what is taking place
Гуково и
there.
Донецк, они до сих пор там
The OSCE
работают.
observers have
Они
arrived to
регулярно
Gukovo and
представляют
Donetsk
свои
border
доклады в
crossings.
Вену,
They're
параллельно
working there.
с докладами
They
специальной
submit their
мониторинговой
reports
миссии
to
ОБСЕ на
Vienna,
Украине, потому что
and
группа
they also
наблюдателей
submit the
ОБСЕ в
reports
Гуково и
of the
Донецке
special
это
monitoring
отдельная группа, она не
mission that is operating
входит в
in
состав,
the Ukraine at the
разумеется,
moment. The
миссии
group that is
ОБСЕ
working
на
in
Украине.
Gukovo
В
and
этих
Donetsk
докладах
is not a
регулярно
part
отмечается то,
of
что
the
они
Ukrainian
видят.
special
Они не
monitoring
видят
group
ничего
working in the Ukraine.
запрещенного,
And they
что
include
пересекало
in
бы
those
границу.
reports all the
Ни грузов, ни людей,
information,
ни
all the data
вооруженной
they get.
техники.
They write that they have not
Так
seen
что
anything
с точки
illegal,
зрения
they have not seen any vehicles
транспарентности
or people
тех переходов, которые
crossing the
контролируются
border
с украинской
illegally.
стороны
And
ополченцами,
speaking about the
каких-либо
transparency of the
вопросов не
border
возникает.
crossings controlled by the
Мы
self-defense
обсуждали
fighters from the Ukrainian
дополнительно,
side,
когда
there are
собирались
no
17 июля
issues
в
to be
Берлине,
resolved. And on
возможные
July
шаги,
17th, when we had a meeting in
которые
Berlin, we
улучшить
discussed
контроль
possible
на
steps that
границе.
could allow us
Мы
to
были к этому
enhance the border
готовы.
control.
Мы неоднократно,
We
в
were
том
ready to
числе
take the necessary
устами
steps.
нашего президента,
And
подчеркивали, что
we have
и Украина, и
repeatedly
Россия — это суверенные
said,
государства.
and the President of the Russian Federation has done
Суверенитет
so on many
накладывает не только
occasions,
права, но
that Ukraine
и
is a sovereign
ответственность,
state.
и
But
государство обязано
sovereignty
контролировать свою
means
территорию,
responsibility,
включая
not only
территорию,
freedom. And a
свою
state
территорию
has to control
вдоль
its
границ.
own territory,
Мы несем
including
полную ответственность за
its
все
border
протяжение
territories
российско-украинской границы с нашей
and its
стороны.
border. We are
Исходим из
responsible
того, что
for
Украина
the whole
несет такую же полную
border on our
ответственность за
side, and we believe that the
протяжение
Ukraine is supposed
границы
to
со своей
be
территорией.
responsible
При
for
этом
the
в
whole
помощь
border
украинскому
on that
государству,
side.
учитывая
And
наличие
in order to
вооруженного
help
конфликта
the
на
Ukrainian
украинской
side,
территории,
given that there is
в
an
помощь
ongoing
украинскому
military
государству
conflict,
была выдвинута
we decided
уже более
to
полугода назад миссия, специальная
launch a
мониторинговая
special
миссия
monitoring OSCE mission.
Ее утвержденная
It was
численность
done
500
6
человек.
months ago.
Это при
It
желании
includes
можно
500
увеличить.
people.
Недавно мандат этой
And the
миссии
number
был
of
продлен.
can be further
И вот
increased.
на встрече
The main date
17
of the mission
августа в Берлине,
has been
когда мы
recently
собирались,
extended.
мы
And
были
on August
готовы
17 in
поддержать
We stated
призыв
that we
к
were
тому,
ready
чтобы
to
ускорить оснащение этой
support
миссии необходимым оборудованием,
the calling
включая беспилотники.
for
Это
supporting the mission with additional
предусмотрено ее
equipment,
мандатом,
including drones.
если это совпадает
It is
с
under the mandate
обозначенными в
of the
мандате
mission.
целями
And
контроля, мониторинга того, что происходит.
Used for the purposes of
И
control and
это
monitoring,
право
that are
ОБСЕ,
declared
оно
under
уже
the
закреплено, повторю, в решениях, которые
then it can be
постоянный совет
done.
ОБСЕ принял.
And the right
Мы
of the
также
mission to
поддержали
use
предложение
that
Германии
equipment
о
is
том,
also
чтобы
enshrined in the
между
documents that the
российскими,
OSCE Permanent Council
украинскими
adopted.
представителями и
And we also supported the
представителями
idea
ОБСЕ,
of a meeting between the
которые
Russian and
работают
Ukrainian
как
representatives
на
and the
Украине, так и в
representatives
России,
of the OSCE
был
that are
налажен
operating both
регулярный
in
обмен
Russia and in the
информацией
Ukraine.
в режиме
And we
реального
also
времени
support
обо всех
the
инцидентах,
suggestion of
которые любая из этих
exchanging the
сторон
information on any
заметит
incidents
и зафиксирует.
between the three
Мы
sides.
тоже в этом заинтересованы, потому что, вы знаете, наша территория
And
периодически
you know it is
подвергается
of
обстрелам
vital
с украинской стороны.
For us as well.
По всем нашим оценкам непреднамеренным, но от
There
этого
have
не
been
легче.
repeated shootings
Тем людям, которые страдают от
across our
подобных
side
обстрелов,
from the
разрушается
Ukrainians.
частная собственность,
And you know,
инфраструктура и так
people
далее.
suffer,
Вот,
civilian
собственно говоря, к чему мы
population
были
suffer from
готовы,
that, because
и
such
все эти
shootings,
формулировки, наверное, не выдам
they
большого секрета,
destroy
были закреплены
infrastructure.
в проекте
And
протокола, который мы
all
хотели в
these
Берлине
wordings
подписать
were
неделю назад.
included into the minutes that
С
we were
моей стороны
supposed
все
to
предложения,
sign in
которые
Berlin.
германские
On my behalf,
инициаторы
all the
этой
suggestions
встречи
initiated by the
согласовали на
German
бумаге,
partners
были поддержаны. Так что
got their
пока я не
support.
знаю, почему
I supported
эти
every idea they
договоренности до сих пор
suggested.
не опубликованы.
That is why
Видимо,
I do not
какая-то
know why our agreements
возникла
have not been
задержка.
published
Но
yet.
еще раз подчеркну, я вам
There must
перечислил
have been a
те
reason
шаги,
for
которые
delay.
мы уже предприняли и
So I
готовы
have
дополнительно
enumerated the
предпринять,
steps that we have
для того,
already
чтобы ни у
taken
кого не
and
было
are ready to take
каких-либо сомнений
additionally,
в нашей заинтересованности
so that
обеспечить
no
должный
one had
контроль
any
на
doubts
границе, не допуская
regarding our
пересечения
commitment to providing
людьми
the
или
necessary
техникой,
control on the
которые
border in
запрещены
order to prevent any illegal border crossing by vehicles or people. And also data or the facts that the OSCE observers see at the border, they include into the reports they submit to the organization. Bloomberg Agency. Sergey Viktorovich, two questions.
Коллеги из «Коммерсанта» хотел уточнить. Речь идет в основном о
First,
статье
the
3 Женевской конвенции,
is relevant
пункте
to
С,
the
где
question my
говорится об
Commerçant
уничтожающем
colleague
достоинстве
asked.
человека отношении к военнопленным.
We were referring to the Article 3 of
С
the
этой точки
Geneva
зрения,
Convention.
были ли какие-то нарушения в связи
The
с
Article 3
парадом
provides for
военнопленных в
the
Донецке? И
humiliating
по контролю над
treatment.
границей хотелось уточнить.
And
Сегодня
speaking about the
украинская сторона
do
заявила
you think that there
о
were
том,
any
что в районе
violations during the so-called parade in the southeast
деревни
Ukraine?
Маркино,
And
это
also
юг
there have been
Донецкой области,
information that in
было
Markovo
вторжение,
village in
по
the
их словам,
south of the Donetsk region,
колонны российской военной техники.
there was
Было
an intrusion
столкновение,
of
и,
the column of the
соответственно,
military vehicles.
они
They also said that there
более
were
конкретно
military
каких-то данных не
collisions.
сообщают. Но
They
это
did
где-то вот
not add
рядом
any
с
specific data,
с
but as
Азовским
far as I understand,
морем
it is
и
near
на юге
the
Донецкого,
Azov Sea
Донецкой области.
at the south of the
Что
Donetsk
было со стороны
region.
России, соответственно, такой мини-вторжение.
So it was like a little mini invasion on the part of Russia. Do you have any information to confirm or deny this fact? Well, I haven't heard about that, but misinformation, disinformation about our so-called intrusions and invasions exists, and it exists a lot. Several days ago there have been announcements that some sort of a military column from Russia was shelled, that the armored vehicles were captured with some documents describing who went even to the leave or holiday from any division. Well, if even that were true, who would take such sort of a library on a military mission? That's just ridiculous. By the way, no one could confirm this information. I believe it was in The Guardian, and maybe tomorrow a foreign newspaper might publish the news item, so-called news item, which you've told about me. But no special services and no independent sources could confirm this information. Well, if we speak about the special services of Ukraine as independent sources. Well, as far as the treatment of the prisoners of war, well, the lawyers must deal with that. I saw the picture of the parade, which you mentioned, and I haven't seen anything which even would remind the bad treatment of prisoners of war. At the same time, the actions of the Ukrainian special forces, I do not mean army, there are a lot of battalions who do not report to anyone but the oligarchs who created those battalions on their money. There is the National Guard, which is partially formed of the right sector. There is the right sector itself, who is acting independently without the National Guard, and the fact how they treat the civilian population is, I believe, a military crime. I haven't seen anything like that, of this kind, on behalf of the self-defense men of Donetsk and Lugansk. When they take someone as a prisoner of war, they render aid and assistance to a soldier, even the medical assistance, or if a soldier was killed, a Ukrainian soldier was killed, they bury him as a human and not just put the body in a pit and then just dig it out with the tank. There were a lot of reports about how the Ukrainian military treats their killed soldiers. I believe that national reconciliation supposes, as the sad experience of many conflicts teaches us, I believe it supposes finding the truth and bringing the military criminals to justice. In South Africa, sometime in its time, a commission of truth was created. In other countries, similar mechanisms were created. But I believe we'll have to do something like that, otherwise the nation would not be reconciled. But first, we must stop the war. And while we are taking the necessary efforts, we must think not only about the southeastern Ukraine, but about Ukraine as such. I mentioned the report of the Special Monitoring Mission of the OSCE. Besides the description of the humanitarian crisis in the southeast, it also says that the efforts to launch a political process could have some difficulties, and the report of the OSCE speaks about the repressions on the so-called freed areas, liberated areas. And the OSCE observers express concerns that the arrests of those who do not agree with the government on the liberated territories are turning to a witch hunt. So, and there's an example of the so-called Aidar battalion activities in Lugansk region. The report says that a lot of people run away from the southeast of Ukraine to Russia, but it also says that there is a problem with the people who'd like to wait till the war passes in other regions of Ukraine, the so-called domestically displaced persons, internally displaced persons, and those displaced persons who come to the west of Ukraine face difficulties. The local population, the OSCE population says, do not treat them as friends. The children of the refugees do not receive places in schools, seats in schools. In some towns, they even refused shelter. So this puts a question to the national unity and to the agreement signed by Yatsenyuk, Tagnebok and Klitschko on the 21st of February. If they were speaking for the national unity of the nation only to gain power, and then forget about that, this is a crime against their own people. And I hope that there will be understanding of that. And when we speak about how we restore the national unity and who stands in its way, I'd like to quote the words of the governor of the Odessa, I believe, region, Mr. Palitsa, the protege of Mr. Kolomoisky, who publicly called upon not accepting internally displaced people in Odessa and not to allocate money to restore Donbass. In exchange, I do not know what would he propose. Maybe the idea is to destroy the living environment of the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine to such a stage that life itself would not be possible there, and that all the Russian speakers might leave and some Western Ukrainians could be the new settlers on those areas, but this is the ethnic cleaning. REN-TV, Irina Rachkovskaya. Sergey Viktorovich, could you tell us, is there any additional information about the Boeing tragical case? And could you use tomorrow's presence of the Ukrainian president to get some information about the talks of the dispatchers? Well, we have put forward these issues a long time ago, and there is an impression that all the others just lost interest in the investigation after the first abrupt, strong, even hysterical accusations of the self-defense men. Everyone who spoke these accusations now are keeping silent. I believe we alone are trying to keep the attention on this serious problem. We are urging on implementation of the Resolution 2166 of the UN Security Council. We were alone to express serious concerns about the fact that when this resolution was adopted on the 17th of June, 17th of July, just next day after the catastrophe, it called upon immediate ceasefire around the crash site. And the Ukrainian government publicly announced that there will be no ceasefire, because first they must fight back this place from the self-defense men. And only on the 29th of July, the Ukrainian government announced the ceasefire. So for more than 10 days, the resolution of the UN Security Council was not implemented. We drew the attention of the Security Council to that in order to call on Ukrainians to implement this resolution, but the US and Latvia did not allow us to do that. Recently, our special representative Vitaly Churkin has mentioned this issue again, but nothing clear was said about why the full data of the black boxes is not given to the public. Neither anything was said about why the Ukrainian side cannot publish the records of talks of dispatches with the pilots. No information has been given to us. We also raised this issue in the ICAO, which was directly mentioned in the resolution of the UN Security Council as a coordinating mechanism. They do not see anything transparent either. But we will fight for truth. We will urge for truth, just as with the investigation of the so-called sniper case on the Maidan, as with Odessa case on the 2nd of May, as with the similar events in Mariupol, as with the situation when a fighter shot the Lugansk municipality, and about some smaller cases which caused serious issues and are continuing to cause serious questions, and which are trying to be put down. For example, the lack of information on the results of investigation of those videos of the Ukrainian army using the UN helicopters. This is not mentioned already. We remember about that, and we would not allow to forget all those crimes and to bring to the justice those who committed them. Russia 24, Anna Baldina. Since the beginning of August, the American Air Forces had more than 100 strikes in Iraq on the Islamic militants. What's the opinion of Moscow on that? And what's the opinion of Russia about the Australian announcement that it will join to these airstrikes? Well, a small introduction is needed here. When the Arab Spring began, we proposed to our Western partners and our partners in the region to work together on the basis of the mutually agreed approaches. And as a criterion of such work, we proposed the unity of our views on the necessity to fight the international terrorism. Reiterating this noble cause on words, which is reflected in the UN Security Council resolutions, in practice, our partners were guided with the political reasonability. In the cases when they did not like a regime, they were ready to make alliances with all the opponents of this regime. Remember the situation in Libya, when instead of closing the sky, for which they received the permission of the UN Security Council, NATO air forces fought in the war on the side of those who wanted to move down Gaddafi. And this opposition included a lot of Islamists and terrorists who, receiving weapons illegally, including from the European states, with the fire support of the NATO aviation, have overthrown Gaddafi, massacred him, and after that they began settling not only in Libya but in more than 10 countries of the North Africa, including Mali, where those terrorists invaded, and where the French began fighting against those terrorism. Those French who supported the terrorists in Libya. So, in the absence of a clear-cut criterion of a joint work, it is very difficult to be consistent and to reach success. The same institution, the Islamic State, the former Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, at the beginning of its existence, it was welcomed by Americans, by some Europeans, because it fought against Bashar Assad. It was welcomed just like Mojaheds, who then created Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda served as a boomerang to strike on New York on the 11th of September. Now, the same thing is happening. The Islamic State is out of control. If ever it was under anyone's control, I doubt that. But when the Islamic State began their activities in Iraq, when they conquered almost a third of its territory, including the key infrastructural facilities, and when there was a real threat of invading Baghdad and thus violating the political process which Americans initiated in many things, on finding the compromise people for Iraqi government. Only then the Iraqi announced the structure as terroristic and began fighting with it.
Уже председатель Объединенного комитета начальников штабов США заявил о том, что бороться с исламским государством нужно не только в Ираке, но и в Сирии, откуда, в общем-то, оно и произрастает. И, честно говоря, мы это поддерживаем. Как принцип, о котором я говорил в начале. Нас должно объединять стремление победить международный терроризм и не допускать, чтобы международный терроризм осваивал все новые и новые территории и, по сути дела, создавал террористические государства. Это именно та цель, которую перед собой исламисты ставят. Но когда мы боремся с терроризмом, нужно это делать на основе международного права, в том числе соблюдать суверенитет соответствующих государств. Проходила информация о том, что удары беспилотников, которые наносят силы Соединенных Штатов по позициям исламского государства в Ираке, осуществляются с согласия иракского правительства. Рассчитываю, что так оно и есть. И если, как вот призывают американские военные, существуют планы бороться с исламским государством на территории Сирии и других государств, то в этих случаях необходимо это делать во взаимодействии с легитимными правительствами. Напомню, кстати, говоря о критериях, говоря о том, насколько мы все последовательны и договороспособны, что в июле 2013 года, более года назад, в Лох-Эрни, в Северной Ирландии, состоялся саммит «Восьмерки». И в документах этого саммита, причем единогласно и без каких-либо дискуссий, было записано следующее. Лидеры «Восьмерки» призывают правительство Сирии и оппозицию объединить усилия для борьбы с террористами и изгнания их из страны. Мы активно поддержали, разумеется, такой подход. Но то, что потребовалось более года для того, чтобы начать думать о том, как же на практике эту правильную мысль воплощать, это, конечно, вызывает к сожалению, потому что мы потеряли очень много времени. Еще раз подчеркну, мы будем готовы совместно работать, координировать наши действия. Во-первых, со странами, которые напрямую подвергнуты террористической угрозе, имею в виду и Ирак, и Сирию. Будем помогать укреплять их способность противостоять вооруженным террористам. Будем готовы сотрудничать и с теми странами, которые разделяют наши цели в антитеррористической борьбе. И будем твердо выступать за то, чтобы любые силовые акции против террористов осуществлялись с согласия и при уважении суверенитета соответствующих государств. В этом, я думаю, очень важный залог успеха всех этих усилий на долгосрочной перспективе. Иначе мы будем опять сеять хаос и создавать новые и новые очаги напряженности.
Несмотря на то, что вернулся конвой красивый сразу и пустым, все-таки в Европе считают, что Россия не уважает территориальную целостность Украины,
do not respect the territorial integrity of the Ukraine. And Europe is very concerned with that fact. What are the actions that Russia is going to take in order to restore the confidence to it on behalf of the international community? Well, you know, I suppose that that eventually Europe and the United States will come over their fears and concerns. You know, territorial integrity is a thing that the state is responsible for, and the state is responsible for ensuring. The UN documents say explicitly that all the states have to ensure the territorial integrity of a state that provides for the right of its citizens, for self-determination, and a state that does not use force against its citizens. I suppose this is the fundamental principles. I suppose it is the declaration as of dated 1970, and these principles are still in force. There was a moment when we were blamed for supporting Bashar Assad and for not giving the opposition a chance to overthrow him. But, you know, I already spoke about what could have happened if he had been overthrown. I suppose that there's a very good example of what happened in Libya. At the moment, no one is blaming us for supporting Assad. Our European and American partners I even tried to speak very cautiously about admitting that
главную угрозу представляет не режим Башара Асада, а возможная угроза захвата террористами власти в Сирии и в других странах. Начинают наводить мосты, начинают делать ровно то, к чему мы призываем. Это не для того, чтобы подчеркнуть, что какие мы дальновидные. Нет, у нас тоже бывают просчеты, деятельность нашей дипломатии. Это просто для того, чтобы подчеркнуть, что мы были всегда последовательны. Мы всегда видели главную цель, и терроризм для нас, для всех, главная угроза. И для Швеции, и для России, и для Соединенных Штатов, и для Европы. Она слишком близко уже стала, она слишком опасна. И вот способность видеть вот эту главную проблему, она и в общем-то, позволило нам сохраниться на позициях, которые сейчас все больше и больше востребованы в политике других государств. Точно так же мы выступали против ударов по Сирии. Нас пытались игнорировать, но в конечном итоге согласились с нами в том, что лучше добиться химического разоружения Сирийской Арабской Республики, нежели бомбить это государство. Да, в общем-то, я уже сказал, как в отношении ИГИЛ, исламского государства, и Ирака и Леванта, Запад больше уже сейчас тяготеет к позиции, которая ближе к нашему подходу, нежели к изначальным расчетам на то, что ИГИЛ позволит свалить Асад. Думаю, что и в отношении Украины придет осознание полной тупиковости ставки на поддержку гражданской войны. Ставки на то, что руководство Украины, используя армию, победит часть собственного народа. И на Украине воцарится мир. Я убежден, что если бы очистить европейскую политику от таких конъюнктурных наслоений, идеологизированных, предельно идеологизированных настроений, то европейская культура абсолютно должна воспринять призывы к национальному согласию, к национальному примирению. И точно так же, как шведский язык является государственным Финляндии, хотя Швеция всего 6% населения, я думаю, и русский язык может обрести свое более достойное место на Украине, где как минимум 1/3 этнических русских и больше половины говорит на русском и думает на русском языке. Так что нам нечего стыдиться своей позиции. Мы выступаем не за войну, а за переговоры. Мы выступаем за то, чтобы выполнять то, о чем договаривались. 21 февраля правительство национального единства подписался Запад под этим, включая моих коллег и друзей из Германии, Франции и Польши, и забыл. 17 апреля необходимость немедленного начала конституционного диалога, который должен быть инклюзивным, транспарентным и открытым, с участием всех регионов и всех политических сил, подписались под этим Россия, Украина, Евросоюз и США. Потом все, кроме России, об этом забыли. 2 июля этого года министры иностранных дел России, Украины, Германии и Франции призвали к прекращению огня в течение 3 дней без всяких предварительных условий. Кроме России об этом никто не помнит. Все уже говорят о каких-то предварительных условиях. Поэтому, мне кажется, все-таки жизнь все расставит по своим местам, и Европа вернется к своим коренным интересам, вернется к своим коренным ценностям и принципам, и не будет делать ставку на применение грубой силы, неизбирательное применение сил, который ведет к страданиям сотен и тысяч людей на юго-востоке Украины. Я уверен, что вы смотрите и российское телевидение, и как профессионал можете убедиться, что это не сфабрикованные кадры, не инсценированные кадры. В отличие от того, что в чем нас пытаются обвинять, в частности, сейчас пришел на ум эпизод, когда представитель Совета национальной безопасности и обороны Украины, господин Лысенко, месяц полтора назад, когда очередная была проблема с нашими журналистами, он заявил, что российские журналисты устраивают постановочные боевые действия, в ходе съемок играют роль украинских военнослужащих. И поэтому, сказал официальный представитель Совета национальной безопасности и обороны Украины, и поэтому там, где появляются русские журналисты, там тут же появляются угрозы для мирного населения. Подтекст такой, что против украинских военнослужащих, ополченцев, которых играют журналисты, применяется сила и страдает мирное население. Надеюсь, что всем понятно лицемерие и неприемлемость подобного рода анализа, с позволения сказать. Вот, наверное, все, что я хочу вам на этот вопрос ответить.
Спасибо. Газета «Берлинское издание». Господин министр, скажите, пожалуйста, я хочу услышать ваш комментарий на то, что сказала Ангела Меркель вчера в Киеве. Она заявила, что решит конфликт, урегулировать конфликт в Украине, обязательно, что Россия закрывает границу. Она сказала прямо, что закрытие границы, через которые приезжает оружие из России, это невозможно. Как вы можете комментировать это?
Именно по просьбе канцлера Меркель мы рассмотрели, как я уже говорил сегодня, возможность и согласились на то, чтобы на наших контрольно-пропускных пунктах, которые со стороны Украины не контролируются киевскими властями, разместились наблюдатели ОБСЕ.
that are not controlled at the moment by the Ukrainian authorities from the Ukrainian side. And the OSCE observers have done so. And I mentioned that we have done even more than we had committed to. Let me explain why. When the Berlin Declaration was discussed by the foreign ministers of France, Russia, Germany and Ukraine, we called upon all the parties to reach a ceasefire agreement as soon as possible. And then, in the declaration, a following agreement was enshrined. We said that at the border crossings, not controlled by the Ukrainian side, there would be Ukrainian border control officers and the OSCE observers for the whole period of the ceasefire. And as you're aware, we have not yet achieved a ceasefire, because instead of reaching a ceasefire with no preconditions, Kyiv keeps on setting its preliminary conditions. After Mr. Putin met Angela Merkel in Brazil in the middle of July, we decided to host the OSCE observers without waiting for the ceasefire. And we did so at our border crossings.
By the way, on one of those border crossings, Ukrainian border guards are present in connection with this humanitarian mission, which I hope will be continued. We have supported a proposal by Germany to equip the OSCE mission in Ukraine with the drones. I cannot imagine what else we could do, because I'd like to reiterate, we are in full responsibility of our part of the border, and the Ukrainians are responsible for their part of the border. And the OSCE are helping them, and Germany wants that, and we want that to support the mission of the OSCE with the equipment necessary for the monitoring and supervision. But putting forward accusations not reinforced by facts is not reasonable. We are responsible for the border. If someone of you has facts that say that there have been illegal crossings of a border in any format, we'd ask you to present the facts to us. Otherwise, it would happen just as it happened with the Malaysian Boeing, when there were accusations that and the statement that there is evidence, there's proof, there's facts, and now silence. And now we are asking and fighting for truth, so that all this evidence and proof that our American partners and Ukrainians have, so that this proof would be shown to us. We can't get it. So let us not seriously discuss the unfounded statements. Thank you. Olga Golovanova, Interfax Agency. Sergey Viktorovich, last week, François Hollande, the President of France, proposed a meeting of heads of governments of the Norman Four. Are you considering this idea? Well, I have already commented on our relations and our view of different formats, including the Minsk format, including the Norman format, including the Geneva format, in which, in particular, Mr. Yatsenyuk was mostly interested. We are open to work within all the formats with the understanding that they will be used not to put forward ungrounded demands to Russia, but to agree on how to implement the existing agreements and how to develop new agreements. We do not want to make an impression that all the decisions are already taken and we have nothing but to implement them. We agreed only on principles, but the principles are of utmost importance. Ceasefire with no preconditions. Could anyone give me any arguments against the principle? When this very goal, ceasefire with no preconditions, is put forward in every conflict where we really want to stop the bloodshed. The principle of the comprehensive national dialogue, including constitutional reform, a transparent dialogue, an understandable dialogue, an open dialogue with the participation of all regions and political forces. Who could oppose that? Of course, in order to launch this thing in practice, you have to make additional agreements, and I believe that it would be easier to do so with the support of the external players, such as Russia, Europe and the US, but the participation of all the Ukrainian players, as the Geneva statement says, it must be done. The participation of all the regions and political forces. The questions about who could represent the regions and political forces can be discussed and are being discussed by Russia, Ukraine, the self-defense people and the OSCE. It is being done. But do you see the idea that all the political forces must be included into the dialogue? What about the Communist Party of Ukraine? No matter how anyone treats it, but it is a parliamentary party voted for by the people. It was banned and ousted from the parliament. Will it be present in the dialogue or not? How would the West, Germany, would consider this and treat this? Is that included into the principle of inclusiveness? You must discuss those things. You must find the common ground in order to make this acceptable, first and foremost, for the Ukrainians. But we must base on the interests of the Ukrainian people and not on the interests of only those who announce themselves authorities. We acknowledged and accepted President Poroshenko, you know that, and we expect President Poroshenko to use the mandate of trust that he received, despite all the nuances of the elections. We hope that he'll use his mandate to stop the war and not to aggravate the conflict and make it deeper and deeper. And we hope that the national conciliation will remain the main task of any leader, as it should be. And we really hope that the nationalist notes in Ukraine would be heard not as loudly as they are heard now from some radicals, including the radicals in the parliament. I mean the Svoboda party, I mean Mr. Leshko. I hope that the Ukrainian government would be focused on the interests of states and the Ukrainian people, and not just finding support in the ultra-radical elements. Marta Levato, Italian news agency. Mr. Minister, on Saturday there will be the EU summit. What are the expectations of Russia about the President of the European Union and the Foreign Affairs Commissioner? There is the Italian minister as one of the candidates, Federico Macchiarini, and he causes a lot of protest because he is in close communication with Russia. Could you comment on that somehow? Well, you know, I met Federico only once when she came to Moscow, and I've never communicated with her since. Well, she several times called me by the phone and expressed concern about the situation in Ukraine, asked me to explain to her our understanding, so I would not say that we have a close communication. A closer communication is with John Kerry. Is he balloting somewhere in the European Union? No? Well, but that's the affair of the European Union, and I believe that some compromises will be found. I know that there must be some combinations, for example, the north of Europe and the south of Europe, the old Europe, the new Europe, etc. I'm not an expert in that, by the way, but I'm sure that your leaders will agree on that. We, in any case, and we are constantly highlighted, are interested in the fact that the European Union is strong and independent. European Union is our strategic partner, no matter who tries to change it That is not possible. We have too much in common. We have too much that connects us, not only in trade, economy and investments, but also in our interest in peace and prosperity in Europe and around Europe. So that no one from other ends of our planet, by implementing its policy here, which they have right to do, so that no one would do that au detriment in the damage of the Russia interests and EU interests. Mr. President, Mr. Minister, could you tell us about the visit of the President Putin to Japan? What are the prospects of that? And the second question about Korea. There is the visit of Mr. Kim Jong-un to Russia. Could you clarify this information? Mr. Who, sorry? The leader of the North Korea. Oh, I see. Well, the second question, I can tell you from the first part that there are no such plans in the offing. And as far as the invitation to President Putin to visit Japan, you asked how do we see it in the context of Ukrainian situation. What's the link? Mutual limitations, sanctions from Japan, the conflict between Russia and Japan in connection with the Ukrainian situation. We do not link the relations with Japan with the Ukrainian conflict or the change of climate. We have a feeling that our relations with Japan are independent and self-prosperous, and our leaders mentioned that. The Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Vladimir Putin, when they spoke, they reiterated that. And so our president was invited by the Japanese side. He accepted the invitation. The Japanese side has confirmed the date. Everything else is strange. Well, have there been any details about that between the Russian government and the Japanese government? There would be no meeting now? Why there would be no meeting? What has happened now between Russia and Japan? A couple more questions, two more questions. Bloomberg, the second round, yeah? No, Reuters there. Hello. Okay, Reuters and Bloomberg. Thank you for answering the many questions. I'd like to ask, on the whole, what's your opinion? Do you expect any breakthrough on some issues in Minsk? Because there are a lot of contradictions. Economy, humanitarian aid, convoy. What do you expect from the tomorrow's meeting? Some breakthrough points or something? Well, the leaders meet. It is a summit meeting with the participation of the European Commissioners, of course. So, the foreign policy and the economic agencies and the energy agencies, ministries will be, of course, represented at the meeting. And we must make a contribution to its preparation, I believe. So we do not expect, we are just working. We are preparing materials where our approaches are set forth, and they are not set forth as ultimatums, just as it happened on the Ukrainian side when there were negotiations on gas. Russia, European Commission, and Ukraine, when the Russian side accepted the initial proposals of Brussels, which were denied by the Ukrainian side. Then we put forward some ideas for further compromise, but in the end, a package which was much more profitable for Ukraine than the conditions on which the Yanukovych government bought gas. It was denied as well because the Ukrainian side was guided by an ultimatum. I do not know what would be their positions in their materials, but we are not speaking in ultimatums because the culture of international communication supposes the opportunity to hear the partner, to understand its legitimate interest in the negotiations and take into account the interest in such a way so that it would be balanced with your legitimate interest. We will be trying to follow this approach in our economic issues. So I'd repeat, we are not passively waiting or expecting something. Everyone expects or awaits something from us. They say, you must change your position, we expect the change of your behavior. Now we hear that more and more rarely, because the approaches of our partners are changing. As far as the Assad regime is concerned, as far as the chemical demilitarization was concerned, as far as the Islamic State was concerned. And I really hope that our Western colleagues during the meeting in Minsk and in other formats, be that Norman or Geneva format, I hope that the colleagues will not come just with mere expectations that we would solve everything for them magically, but that they will come prepared for influencing the Ukrainian side in such a way that the Ukrainian side would understand the responsibility for its own country and understand that it is not fighting for Ukraine against Russia, but that is fighting for Ukraine as a state where everyone would be comfortable, would feel comfortable to live. Russians, Ukrainians, Romanians, Hungarians, and all other nationalities. So we should work further, and all the rest, I believe, we will cope. If we all think about the interests of Ukraine, then Russia, and primarily Europe, as the largest partners of Ukraine, could really help to Ukraine to overcome the current crisis. Well, I see Russia Today wants to ask something. The Arab office, okay. Ashraf Bahrad, Russia Today. Sergey Viktorovich, yesterday the foreign ministers of 5 Arab states gathered in Saudi Arabia. It is a group of the friends of Syria. They took some steps, some anti-terrorist steps. What are your ideas about these steps, especially now when we know that Qatar, Egypt, Jordan and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are participating in solving this issue? That's the first part of my question. And the second part, we know well that the situation in Libya has come out of control, even though there was the 7th article of the UN there. Now there is the 7th article about Iraq and Syria, and if the situation in Syria and Iraq comes out of control just like in Libya, how do you suppose to solve this thing?
As for the countering terrorism, I suppose both your questions are related to counteracting terrorism. We have repeatedly voiced our position, and I voiced it again today. The Arab countries, the Persian Gulf countries, including Jordan and as well as Jordan and Egypt, had a meeting yesterday. I don't know what was discussed during the meeting, but I do hope that our partners from Arab countries will inform us and those countries that can contribute to counteracting terrorism in the region. And I think it is a good idea to include Syria itself in the group of friends of Syria, because Syria, headed by Bashar Assad, is really facing the terrorist threat. And until recently, when terrible terrorist acts took place in Syria, our Western partners had refused to condemn them in the Security Council of the United Nations. They had been refusing to condemn any acts against Bashar Assad. They had stated that he had provoked those acts himself. So, but then it makes us think that terrorism can be justified. But it is a violation of everything that is enshrined in the documents of the United Nations, because they state that there can be no justification of terrorism. And I've already mentioned that everyone should be fully aware of the terrorist threat that is spreading very fast. And I suppose that the Arab countries of the five that you've just mentioned are well aware of that. I've already talked to my colleagues from Egypt, Jordan, the Emirates and other countries. They're getting more and more aware of it. And very soon, they'll have to make a choice. And everyone will have to choose what is more important, to overthrow a regime in order to satisfy its own needs and to fulfill its own agenda, given that the situation might go out of control, or the second option, to find pragmatic ways to take concerted efforts against a common threat. And the most important common threat for us is terrorism at the moment. We are for the second option. Because personal dislikes were the foundation for overthrowing Hussein and other leaders, and personal dislikes were also a reason for overthrowing Gaddafi. At the moment, we see that Libya is almost a failed state at the moment. It is almost a terrorist threat. First, one parliament was elected, and then another parliament was elected that said that the first one was illegitimate. Speaking about the resolutions adopted under the Article 7, it is related to foreign terrorists that come to fight to the Middle East. I've already said that any actions taken under Article 7 have to be taken in close cooperation with legitimate authorities of given states. Last question, please. Thank you.
Первый канал Тимур Саразиев. Скажите, пожалуйста, если украинские власти не захотят принимать гуманитарный груз или будут так же, как в первый раз, затягивать его принятие, рассматривается ли возможность повторения ситуации, которая была? Спасибо.
Я даже не хочу Well, you know, I don't even want to think about it. I don't even want to think about them postponing the receiving of the aid again. There have been so many artificial procedures that were not at all well grounded. Let me say one more time that the International Red Cross Committee in its report and the reports of the OSCE observers mission
гуманитарный кризис на юго-востоке Украины прекращены, по крайней мере, этими уважаемыми международными организациями.
To keep silent about the humanitarian crisis in the Ukraine have come to an end. Those two organizations are trying
подчеркнул свое намерение расширять свою гуманитарную деятельность на юго-востоке Украины, особенно в Луганске и его окрестностях. ОБСЕ высказалась за продолжение гуманитарных усилий. Мы будем в этих усилиях участвовать. Мы хотим согласовывать свои действия с украинцами, с украинским руководством, которое тоже планирует направлять дополнительные гуманитарные грузы на юго-восток. Мы будем сотрудничать в том, чтобы обеспечивать гарантии безопасности со стороны ополченцев. Мы будем готовы сотрудничать на этих же направлениях и в отношении тех гуманитарных грузов, которые обещают направить Евросоюз, другие страны-доноры. И думаю, что международные организации, включая Всемирную продовольственную программу, включая Управление ООН по делам беженцев, Управление ООН по координации гуманитарных вопросов, тоже должны будут и намерены внести свой вклад в это. У нас здесь абсолютно открытый подход. Мы готовы на полную транспарентность, как это делалось и в отношении первого конвоя. Никаких секретов здесь нет, никаких попыток спекулировать на этой гуманитарной ситуации, злоупотреблять ею. Мы
speculate on the situation. And we suppose that no one should do that. Thank you. Thank you.